Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and today we're talking about Empyre number 4. So, something that somebody mentioned on the last review I did of Empyre, which was only a couple of days ago because of the way Empyre is being released on a weekly basis, that they appreciated the quick pace of these books. I do think that has helped keep my opinion relatively strong until quite recently about this series because it felt quite freshly paced and not drawn out over a number of months, and that has been nice. But for those of you that watched my most recent review, you'll know I've also been a little down on this crossover where I was once more excited. As we started to get a bigger picture of what this mini-series, or whatever you want to call it, has been about, I find myself liking it considerably less, and this book hasn't changed much. So we have the same creative team behind this, Al Ewing and Dan Slott, with Al Ewing doing the script, Valeria Skiddy doing the artwork, and Marte Garcia doing the coloring, Joe Camarga doing the lettering. As far as the art goes, we are pretty consistent in terms of the strengths of it, what I like about it has held true, and we get a lot of cool imagery. Once again, I find myself largely not at all critical of the artwork, in fact, usually impressed by it, and often blown away by some of the shots we get of the Fantastic Four and the Avengers working together, but underwhelmed by the story at large and what these amazing artists are tasked with drawing. A criticism I find I label with so many of these events far too often. It's a real big sticking point with these crossovers, and this book really doesn't feel any different. I can lower that a bit. There we go. So let's kind of go over what it's about. It pretty much starts off with the ongoing debate regarding the use of the pyre as some sort of device or something that will burn away Earth's star and thus stop the Kotati invasion in its tracks. But obviously the heroes of Earth are against that. Meanwhile, Hulkling apparently went off for a nap. I have a lot of... I really don't understand the time frame of all of this invasion at this point. I thought this was all pretty urgent and quickly unfolding, but clearly things are dragging out now, which is felt in the story itself. So there was a lot of issues with pacing, and we're on page 1. But nevertheless, the Hulkling emerges from his bedchambers, completely different. They talk about it later in this book, but it's very obvious that he's changed and he insists on deploying the pyre. She scans with her hammer and it confirms that it's a complete match for Hulkling. He insists he is who he is, but the heroes kind of, object to destroying the Earth. They have a little bit of a battle, and Hulkling orders, I think, Captain Marvel and the Human Torch's death, but she only has a spell prepared for an emergency teleportation, so it just teleports them to Hulkling's apartment. They meet up with Wiccan, and meanwhile, we cut to Avengers Mountain where, the same scene is happening between Tony Stark and Reed Richards again. Although we do learn that Tony is building some sort of new Iron Man suit that's Fantastic Four themed. He has a good line about, this is how he thinks, this is his process, and he kind of gets Reed Richards to back off a little bit when he starts harassing him over building a new Iron Man suit. And he says he did the same thing with Thor to go off on his quest in a now cancelled tie-in, which sort of serves as a bit of a reminder of some of the ongoing problems in this series and Empyre in general. Nevertheless, we cut to Wakanda, and there's a brief little fight scene going on with Black Panther, and his forces squaring off against the Kotati. Nothing too remarkable, but the artwork, there is a cool shot of Black Panther. But then we cut to Swordsman and Koi, who are kind of watching over all of this. They realize a few key players are missing in action and quickly assume that they are about to be attacked, which is correct. Sort of. They're more of being approached by Invisible Woman, The Thing, She-Hulk, and Mantis, with Mantis trying to reach out to her son and like try and get him to stand down, basically. Um, However, he's not interested in doing that, and they try and say like, well, we could talk this out, but then She-Hulk kind of says like, no, no, the Kree-Skrull Alliance is deploying the Pyre right now. More talk will only give them time to use it. You need to press your attack. And they're all like, oh wait, you're kind of giving away the game there, She-Hulk. And she suddenly transforms into like some sort of Katati plant thing. And they reveal, kind of in a nod to her green skin, but oh well, actually it's kind of clever because they're like, at first I thought it was dumber than it was, but they're like, well, we can create people to infiltrate others using Katati like plant biology, like they did with the swordsmen. The problem is that turns them green, but in the case of She-Hulk, that works just fine. So when they gave her that new weapon and supposedly restored her intelligence, which by the way, I'd said earlier and was feeling this in issue 3, it was nice to see the old She-Hulk back and Jennifer in control of herself again. But it turns out she wasn't, and she had been a plant person all along and is, like, based on the language of this book and the preview, just dead. And this new creature is, like, grown into her shell, and the rest of her is gone. Swordsman and Koi flee, while Wiccan, like, they go back to Wiccan's apartment, and he determines, like, no, there's no way that's Hulkling. Something's going on with him. Clearly, his mom got to him. Or, well, I guess it's his grandmother got to him, or whatever. But the point is, the Empress has disguised herself as Hulkling or has taken control of him somehow. So, there's a lot going on there. And going over it now, I do see the value in why people might like this book, but personally, I'm just not with it. The whole thing with She-Hulk, like I said, it was kind of clever, but I don't know. That is, like, it just doesn't feel like enough of a moment, or that the story is significant, that enough that that's going to have any sticking value. I agree that it was shocking, but against the larger pattern of tie-ins and stuff, like, it's a little frustrating. Aggressively Relaxing says the immortal She-Hulk will be fine, but what a gnarly moment. And maybe that's the best way to look at it, is that it was just a well paid off moment, and it's pretty clear there's a lot built in where She-Hulk will probably survive and be fine. And maybe that's okay. But it really reinforces a couple of things that I've been feeling about the direction of Empyre. First of all, we only have 2 books left now, and it really doesn't feel like there's going to be much more to this story. More and more, as I've kind of gotten farther into this, it really feels like the story should have been about the Kree-Skrull Alliance, because even some stuff brought up by Koi being like, well, he doesn't really believe in it, that they're just allying against the Katati rather than allying for real. And I think there is a version of this story, and maybe these last 2 issues will really hammer this point home somehow, but I doubt it, where the Alliance is what gets the Katati to stand down. Blake Mugen saying, yeah, so far this story is boring. It really had a lot of promise. I wish more was done with the alliance between the Kree and the Skrull, because it really just kind of feels like that's background stuff to this plant people invasion. And the plant people invasion, in so many ways, feels like a typical Marvel event, where there's this kind of global phenomenon going on. It's just sort of this vague, generic thing. I guess what bugs me about this She-Hulk thing is, yeah, it's brutal, but it also means we've had this big alien invasion and there's been like 1 notable casualty in all of this. And no, I don't really advocate for more comic book death, but I don't know, you gotta have something. The structure of this story is kind of hinging on this sort of thing now, and there really isn't much to it. If it had been something where it's like, yeah, a thing died on that flagship and plants just grew out of him and we were just racking up casualties, yes, that's very rough long term for Marvel canon, but at least that would be more significant. Really, what it comes to is you can't tell that kind of story with Marvel superheroes in canon like this. You have to structure it better than that. I think Death Metal is a good example of how you can kind of tip the board over, like they did with Secret Wars, and maybe like go for it in terms of bloodshed, or you tell a story more closer along the lines to what was kind of initially advertised for Empyre, or at least was sort of hinted at first, and it would be more political and talking about the nature of the Kree and the Skrull. There, I really feel like there could have been a solid setup for the stakes of this event being whether or not this empire can form. In some ways, that is what's going on here, but they drowned it in all this Katati stuff, and we lose that more interesting aspect, if you ask me. I don't know. I think there's a way this story could have been structured more along those lines of politically, more along the lines of questioning whether or not this alliance can be formed. And then you have like thousands and thousands of years of warfare between these two races, and that coming to an end as the stakes. And that does feel like a big deal. That feels like a deal where like the Fantastic Four and the Avengers could have been a little bit at odds with each other, given all that stuff we were learning about the economy early on in the Fantastic Four tie-in. Now it just doesn't really feel like it has any point at all. Thunder God Sid was saying, not just boring but uninteresting, I'm finding it hard to read. Yeah, like I'm not really... I can't tell you like, oh no, you're not engaging with the politics enough. It's a different kind of story and not full of that sort of action. No, no, no. The politics is very boring and very paint by numbers. There really isn't any meat to this story to enjoy. That feeling that Sid has, I agree with, and I don't want to come down too hard on people that enjoy it. And like I said, like going through the events, like there is some value here. And what Aggressively Relaxing said, like that was a brutal moment with She-Hulk, but I don't know. It's just not there for me. Blake Nugent saying, now I will just read or wait for the 10th, I guess. Huh? Or whatever. I'm not sure exactly what you're saying there, Blake, but he's talking about he's just waiting for the X of Swords event for the X-Men. Yeah, that, I mean, based on the ambition Hickman has, and even some of the stuff coming out of the tie-ins with the X-Men for Empyre, I'm definitely leaning more towards, like, maybe X of Swords being more fun, because overall, yeah, I really don't think it's worth recommending this book. Bad Mr. Box says, She-Hulk was dead already when she landed on the moon, according to the Katati, or whatever it's spelled. Yes, she's been dead the whole time in her Neanderthal form. I kind of interpreted that statement as more of like, oh, she was doomed the second she stepped foot on our turf, because we had this plan for her. We could easily like take control of her without the others knowing, and she was like the perfect infiltrator and agent. That aspect of it is clever, and in a better story, that could have been a really cool moment. As it stands, like the only reaction we've really gotten out of it so far is the Thing looking shocked above, like as he's on the ground looking above as she stands above him, and like that's it. It doesn't even end the issue. The big cliffhanger we get is like, oh, that's not really Hulkling, which, like I said, I could tell right away the way he suddenly changed how he was acting and stuff. It's very, very disappointing from Al Ewing. I'm not at all... It doesn't change my opinion of Dan Slott, and I don't think he's that involved in these core books, beyond, like I said, kind of bouncing some ideas off of it. Al Ewing, to me, is a relatively new writer, but everything else I had read out of him, including some stuff that's ongoing right now, was a lot more promising. And once again, we have a relatively good writer kind of get churned out by this Marvel event system and not getting a good story out of it at all. And that's also disappointing because I have said it before, but a lot of other more recent Marvel events have been going in the right direction. So this is like a huge step back in so many ways for Marvel. Aggressively Relaxed says, there's decades of build-up paying off this story. I really hope the Kree Skull piece sticks. I feel bad that you're like the only person in chat right now who's super optimistic, but you're not the only person out there who's like among our viewers feeling that way. I really was all for this story up until a couple of issues ago. And like that, there was decent build up in terms of using these characters and swordsman, mantis, koi, hulkling, all these other characters. It's cool to see them in the story, and I was so excited early on because of all those elements. But that stuff really doesn't feel like it's been used very much at all. And those characters, I like Koi and Swordsman have, but they're just the antagonists of this story, which is kind of boring if you ask me. They were more interesting as like these I don't know, potential allies of the Avengers and stuff. Early on, I liked that stuff more. Now the Swordsman seems like the main bad guy of all of this, and that's kind of boring. The peace process also doesn't feel like it really came out of anywhere. It just sort of happened, and I wish more of that process was part of Empire. Instead, we're kind of dealing with the after effects of it, which could be interesting, but I really wish we got to see more of that actually unfold. And Mr. Vox is saying, after reading Marvel for 30 years or so, I'm kind of tired of both Kree and Skrulls. Yeah, well, that's also where the Kotati could have been interesting. I will point out, I didn't actually turn on the story when it became a story about the Kotati invading Earth. It was only until it kind of became obvious that that's all the story was going to be, and the Kotati weren't being that interesting. Because I'm all for us getting more aliens in the mix, pretty much under any circumstances with Marvel. There are a lot of great races out there, and relying on the Kree and the Skrull and the Shi'ar as like the big three, or only a handful of others beyond that, gets very repetitive very quickly. And there's a lot more Marvel can do with existing aliens, like the Kotati, or other races, or new races, that I would like to see more of introduced as like an ongoing thing within the world of Marvel. Um, all that being said, like I think the Kree Skrull Alliance is a way we could kind of move past these sort of things a little bit and get new ideas. And I'm not saying that there's a world where I wouldn't want the Kree and Skrull to ever show up in a story again, but striking a balance is definitely a good idea. So I definitely agree with that statement. So no, I don't think I recommend this book. There's a lot of issues with it. Um, so many little problems going on and issues in terms of like all these things we talked about, and even just it having this appealing, attractive element. There's a lot of great artwork, but as I said, that's very disappointing. Andrew Mateshi says at Bad Mr. Box, he's 30 years deep into Marvel as well, and he agrees. I do love some Super Skrull though. He was badass in Annihilation. And I will say Super Skrull has been a fun part of this story overall, even as this story's kind of tailed off a little bit. I still like Super Skrull's character, and he seems to be coming from a very genuine place at the moment, which is kind of cool for him. I like how much, especially early on, he owned up to his mistakes in the past, and how willing he was to acknowledge that, even though he truly, honestly seems to be wanting this peace now, and wanting what's best for this huge empire. Even in this book, when he's arguing for using the pyre, he's like making some compelling arguments. I don't think he's a problem in this story, even like late in the game here. Blake Nugent is saying, I did kind of like how Captain Marvel powered up in this event, plus black and green looks good on her. That was a cool addition to this story, and when that happened, it was a good moment. If nothing else comes out of Empyre, I would like that change in Captain Marvel to be explored in her series a little bit, the way stuff kind of spun out of War of the Realms. That seems like a solid thing to do. And Captain Marvel being like the big change going on, that seems cool. I haven't actually checked out like her tie-ins or what's going on with that yet, but I kind of want to. I just have had a little trouble getting a hold of that book for whatever reason. Bad Mr. Box is saying, and like with there's still being Kree fugitives on Earth, have they been forgotten about by Marvel? They were used in a Captain Marvel comic not that long ago. They might have forgotten it. Empire's been a little messy in that regard. But they have talked about stuff in incoming, and maybe the Kree just don't care about that right now. They got a lot going on, and they're kind of in the middle of this coup and warfare. Those Kree might be just fighting alongside everyone else right now on Earth. Who knows? Most of the fighting seems to be focused around Wakanda right now, though. Certainly a good point. And then Mr. Box also says black and green are evil color schemes. It fits Carol. They don't have to be. They're more like just Kree colors. I think the Hammer could be interesting and could explore like the darkness in her character, like they were hinting early on in Empire. They were hinting at a lot of stuff early on in Empire, though. Like they were talking about those portals having something to do with the X-Men, and so far that hasn't been brought up at all. I don't even know if it's going to be a thing. It's late in Empire's game if it is. So we'll see. Uh, Aggressively relaxed and says this event is unapologetically celebrating how weird the Marvel Universe is. The attention to canon is really nice. Yeah, they've been okay with canon. They did a good job at pulling back on those stories, like with the Celestial Messiah, Hulkling, and Swordsman. But they've also been messier with newer stuff, like Scarlet Witch is appearing in more places than she should. Um, and like I said, stuff that's been teased early on in Empire has been dropped, or like the result of cut, abandoned tie-ins because of how this happened. Which, to be fair, isn't all of Marvel's fault. It's a rough year. So I will give them a little bit of leeway with that. But based on what's just like in this book and this series so far, I can't recommend it or necessarily agree with aggressively relaxing. As much as I appreciate him standing firm and like standing by his opinion, I totally respect that because he's like the only person in this conversation sphere right now that is supporting Empire, and that's a rough place to be in. I was that person for some of these earlier Empire tie-ins in some of our earlier streams, and I have a lot of sympathy if you're enjoying this. It has gorgeous artwork, and if you can kind of let go of some of the stuff, or if you haven't read all these Marvel tie-ins and you aren't deluged in this, it's worth enjoying. If you're enjoying it, don't let me fault you for it, but I just don't get anything out of these issues, and Empire #4, out of everything I reviewed this week, including some pretty lackluster comics, feels absolutely the weakest. So I think that's probably a good place to end the review on. I don't recommend it, but not everyone has agreed with me, and it's not like omnisciently bad or whatever. Bad Mr. Box is saying the art is good. I get it that. Yeah, I mean, flipping through it now, like after looking over it quite a bit, there are some panels that are rougher than others, but some are really well done. And on the whole, I really enjoyed the visual experience of reading it. Even the last page, like I gave the comic some crap for kind of ending on a weird note. I more have meant the revelation that Hulkling isn't Hulkling. The actual last page is a flashback to Hulkling and Wiccan getting married, and it's a nice picture with all the Young Avengers in it, and just a great, like I would love I don't know, it's just a lovely picture if you've read the Young Avengers. And Bad Mr. Box says the art is a highlight, or the color is a highlight. Absolutely. It has been this whole time. Because of the nature of the Kotati, we've gotten a lot of great examples of really lush imagery, especially early on. And Marte Garcia is a huge part of what I like about this artwork. Although, to be fair, he really can only bring to life what Valerio Skitty draws to begin with. Like, they really are a good team together. And I wish so much these last two issues better lived up to the artwork at hand. Andrew is saying the Shi'ar and the Badoon are like, I'm just gonna kick back and watch how it goes down. Sibs T. You know, if I was one of the leaders of those alien races, that's what I would do too in this situation, because why not? Your intervention can only get you like pulled into this, but anything could happen that could decimate your rivals, and they only have like the means to gain. So if I were one of those aliens, I'd consolidate my resources and react accordingly and be prepared to expand if necessary. The galactic politics they said that at the beginning of Empire and established like they're in flux now because of all of this, and anything could really happen. Um, Bad Mr. Box says, "What is the situation with the Shi'ar nowadays? Last I heard about the Shi'ar was the Xavier's wife who was killed off. They dealt with it recently in some of the X-Men books. I don't remember exactly which, but the Shi'ar are kicking. I think Gladiator was in charge, but no, I don't remember. I might be mixing up my timelines. But they're still, I think they're more tied to the X-Men right now and kind of in their territory. The Shi'ar have always kind of been their own thing anyways. I think it's good that they're, like, this is just focused on the Queen Skull and the Katati right now. That's enough at the moment. We can deal with the fallout of other alien races later and such. And that's the sort of thing that could easily be explored in a series like Guardians of the Galaxy, which is written by Al Ewing, so he should be able to follow up on that stuff nicely. Andrew saying, I'm not caught up, but based on the X-Men ties, they're good. Oh, okay, and Bad Mr. Box confirms Gladiator is leading them. So I am remembering that right. I don't know. There's so much going on in the X-Men, that felt like it happened a while ago. Blake is saying, I will give it one more chance to finish the series. Kind of feel bad now since the art is pretty good. If they're not writing to the story, like, I don't know. I'd feel bad too, because the artists are putting their heart and soul into this thing. I already have ordered the last 2 issues of Empyre, and I'm not canceling that because I'm a reviewer. I don't personally recommend it, but Blake, if that's how you feel, like, that's how you feel. You know, you'll have the complete series that way too, and maybe there will be some cool final moments in this series. I just have a hard time believing it. And we'll have to leave it at that, I guess. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and next up, so we have another Empyre book to tie in, or to talk about. And it's really funny because I did not like that last one, or like Empyre number 4. I really didn't care for it, but we're going to talk about Empyre X-Men number 2, and this opinion is different. Holy crap, I can't wait to talk about this book. It's going to be like night and day compared to Empyre number 4. So stay tuned for that, and we'll probably be getting around to that hopefully around 5:30. We'll see. But thanks for watching, guys, and actually now I'm thinking about it, probably closer to 6, but I'll see you guys then. Thank you for everyone who joined and talked in chat. I really got like no hard feelings hopefully either way if you liked or disliked Empyre number 4. It's certainly not bad or good enough to justify that extreme of an opinion. So like, if you liked it, by all means, I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to share that in the comment section below. And yeah, thanks again, especially for, I'll single out Aggressively Relaxing, just because, like, I think he was a good sport about it all. Stated his case, didn't get, like, you know, no one got inflammatory about it or anything, but I felt bad because pretty much everyone else in chat was roughly feeling the same about this book. And he liked it. And it's a tough position to be when you like something and everyone else is down on it. And I really appreciate him, like I said, like stating his point and giving us a little bit of a discussion about this book. So yeah, we'll see you guys at some point this evening to talk about Empyre X-Men number 2. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time here on Comic Island.